Hello, everybody. Welcome to my video. My name is Arpita, and I am a Scrum Master by profession. I hear a lot of my friends telling me that their company is moving into the world of Agile, or they're transitioning to the Agile lifestyle. And I just thought that, hey, why not share what I know of the subject with everybody out there? So I thought via this series of videos, I would like to present to you my interpretation of what I think Agile, Scrum, and the various methodologies are. With that, let's get to it. All right. Agenda. So what am I going to talk to you about in these videos? Well, I will give a very brief talk on Agile. I will look into what Scrum is, what Kanban is, and what is Scrumban. I will also look into the various Scrum ceremonies, because I know a lot of people, when we talk about Agile, especially in the software side of things, you always look at Scrum as a methodology, as your go-to point of contact. And for teams that cannot adapt to Scrum, because I know Scrum is not something that is everybody's cup of tea, based on the kind of work you do, based on the kind of team you have. So I would also like to talk about the roles that are there. Here, I would mention Agile, because maybe you could just adopt these roles within your team to see if that helps in your collaboration. Part one, what is Agile? By definition, Agile is a set of values and principles that encourage communication and feedback, adapting to changes, and producing working results. I would like to break this down a little and talk about it. Firstly, Agile is a set of values and principles. Just like we all have values of life, we all live by certain values. Agile is also a lifestyle. They say the Agile way of life. I mean, that is a very common word I've heard my colleagues say. And this would help most of you just to understand how better to work within your teams, within a company, to ensure you get good and productive results and your team is, at the end of the day, happy, because I believe a happy team will ensure happy working results. This encourages, Agile encourages communication. It encourages feedback. Over here, it is both giving and receiving feedback. It works on adapting to change, because with every iteration that you do of any of these methodologies, you will see how you can improve, and then your next set will be better. So you constantly find yourselves changing until you guys find your best way of working. And of course, producing working results, because at the end of the day, that is what we want. That is why we are trying to even adopt Agile, right? You want to get better at your results. The reason I have not put better working results is, by working in Agile, tomorrow you are not going to miraculously, there's no such a word, there's not going to be a miracle and you are not going to become a very high performing team, etc. It takes time, which is why you will see over a course of time, you will see improvements. And hopefully at one point, when you look back 6 months, 1 year down the line, you will see your graph has increased. Now, Agile has different frameworks of working. I am going to talk about what I believe are the top three. You have Scrum, you have Kanban, and you have Scrumban. So, yeah, what are these words? Let me explain. What is Scrum? Looking at the definition in the Scrum guide, Scrum is a framework within which people can address complex adaptive problems while productively and creatively delivering products at the highest possible value. Too long, right? And I had the same feeling. So let me break it down for all of you. The framework, it is a framework. It is just a skeleton as a guide for how you should work, or in Scrum. It heavily relies on teamwork and accountability. You cannot, Scrum is not a one-person job. No one person is the driver of this. It's a collaborative effort, and every single member of your team is accountable for the actions he or she does. Or if I'm looking in a software side, they are accountable for every piece of code they deploy. If you look at Scrum on any other from marketing, you are accountable for every product or every bid you make on a marketing platform. Sales, every product you sell, etc., etc. It is an iterative process. As I mentioned, even in my previous definition, you cannot get it right the first time. And typically, you are always looking at ways to improve. And that is why it is an iterative process. For those of you, when you have Scrum Masters, if you have a Scrum Master in your team, you might start off with letting your Scrum Master take the lead on to follow Scrum. But once you as a team have worked on it for enough time, you guys can work together and say, okay, how can we now modify this to ensure we as a team get the most out of it? So you're always looking at changes. And one of the most important things about Scrum is that it has well-defined goals. You cannot have an abstract goal. Scrum does not work that way. You need to have clear goals. You need to know exactly what you are going to work for the next X period of time. And as a team, you all work towards that goal. Now, what are the Scrum values? Now, as I mentioned to you about Agile, it's a set of values and principles, right? I'm going to here focus on values, and each of these frameworks have their own set of values. And Scrum has 5. In no particular order, you have courage. Here it is the courage to take risks. It is the courage to say no, because that is also very important. It is the courage to do something new, and it is the courage to also trust. Sometimes, even though you are apprehensive of something, you sometimes just need that courage to trust your teammate and say, okay, I know what you're doing, I trust you, and let's go. Next, openness. I think this is one of my favorite values in this is openness, because a lot of times we tend to just follow one person's lead, right? You need to be open to share your ideas, to critique other person's ideas, to receive criticism well about your ideas, and to always have this open line of communication within your team. And here I say openness here even across hierarchies, because in some teams you do have that. But if you are new to the team, that should not stop you from being critical or giving a critique on, say, the code of your team lead. It's fine. You need to respect one another. That is also a very, very important value. I think irrespective of who you are, how old you are in that company, or what is your position, I think each one within your Scrum team should be treated on that same level. You give respect, you take respect. I think it's pretty straightforward there. And you have focus as the next value. As I mentioned, if you want to get the most results out of the Scrum framework, you need to have single focus. We will work in something called sprints, which I will talk to you about in the next slide. But even in that, you will see you have a goal, everybody in your team focuses on it, works towards it, and you achieve it. Next goal, and the next. And commitment. This also will make more sense when I talk to you about the Scrum process, but a commitment is when you agree to do something. If you say, okay, we are going to build, I'm going to publish this particular piece of paper, then that's it. You have to put your 100% into all the process that needs to go into printing this pamphlet. It's a commitment that you make not only for yourself, but as a team you make it. So you will be accountable if your team fails, if you don't pull up your part of the like if you don't lift up to your end of the bargain, basically. So these are the 5 Scrum values, and it is on this and that the whole basis of Scrum framework is built upon these values, which you will see now. So the Scrum framework, I can just break it down to you. We have different aspects of it. You have the product backlog, you have a Scrum team, and you guys work in a sprint. You have a sprint retrospective, you have a sprint planning, you have a sprint review, a daily stand-up, and a daily sprint increment, sorry. I will talk more in detail about this a little later, but what I want to talk to you about is how this framework goes. So within a team, you typically would have a product owner who then interacts with your stakeholders. Now, a stakeholder is somebody who basically gives a request from your team. If I'm a stakeholder and if I want this pamphlet, I would then say, okay, I need this pamphlet. I need it to come in 4 different languages. I need it to have XYZ set of instructions. It has to be this size. I need it by this time. So as a stakeholder, I'm giving you requirements of what I want. That then becomes your product backlog. Then what you do, you have a product owner typically in your team who interacts with these stakeholders to say, okay, you know what? Okay, 6 languages is good. 5, we can't do 6 because of, the size of the paper. We can only do 5. They negotiate then with your stakeholders. And they then prioritize your product backlog, which then, one thing about Scrum is you guys work on sprints. Sprint is nothing but, by definition, a sprint is a short race, right? So ideally, in the perfect world, you'd have a 2-week sprint. So for 2 weeks, you fix one goal and you discuss it with your team, and then that's when you have the sprint planning process. In this planning process, the product owner will discuss with all the people within that team to say, okay, guys, we need to make this. What are the requirements you need? Okay, do you need translators? Do you have all the content? Do we have language experts, etc., etc.? You discuss, you estimate, okay, how complex these tickets are and how much of the work can you deliver in 2 weeks? You cannot make this entire pamphlet in 2 weeks. So you break it down. You say, okay, how much of this can we do in that 2 weeks? And once you agree upon that, that becomes your sprint backlog. Now, the sprint is basically, as I mentioned, that duration of 2 weeks, right? And in that, you have everybody working together. You have the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the dev team working together as one unit to achieve that sprint, to achieve this sprint backlog. And while achieving this, one of the most important things is how do we keep track of progress? That happens in the daily stand-up. Now, this is a typical meeting of not more than 15 minutes every day in the morning, where you guys meet as a team and you just give an update on where you are with your particular task. Now, there are different ways of doing this. Some people like to do it. They ask 3 questions. What did you do yesterday? What did you do today? Do you have any blockers? Some teams do it just a generic update. Okay, hey, from the last time I spoke to you, this is where I've made progress. And the one thing that is very important to remember in these meetings is always address the blockers that you have. A blocker is anything that prevents you from completing your task. So you flag it to your Scrum Master and your product owner typically, and they will then work towards unblocking you, communicating to people. If you need something, they make sure you get it, etc. And after 2 weeks, you have a sprint review in which you basically present to your stakeholders what you did in those 2 weeks. Now, a lot of, personally for me, I would say a sprint review is not a mandatory ceremony, only because sometimes at the end of the 2 weeks, you don't really have something to show. But I very much encourage people to have it at least once a month to show the progress that you have made. If you can't do it every sprint, personally, I think it's okay. But I think different Scrum Masters and different POs have their own different say about how often this should happen. And at the end of the 2 weeks, you typically have an increment that you will then push forward to your next teams, or in cases of software development, you deploy it onto production, etc. Now, what is this one thing up here? Well, a sprint retro. Here, retro is retrospective. And sprint retrospective is, as a Scrum Master for me, one of the most important processes in this entire Scrum framework. In the retrospective, we look back at our 2 weeks and we say, okay, what are the things that we did really well in these 2 weeks? We also look at what are the things we did that weren't great. This could be, maybe as small as, hey, we had fewer people within the team, to, hey, we did not get the right information from stakeholders, to anything. It is just an open discussion where you talk about how you can improve the next 2 week cycle. And although a lot of people I have seen, a lot of my colleagues, they don't really, sprint retrospectives are something like, yeah, everything is fine. But I would highly encourage you guys to have these meetings, because even the smallest problem at some point needs to be addressed. Otherwise, it's going to become big. That's all for the Scrum framework. With this, we move to the next part, that is Kanban. Now, what is Kanban? Kanban is a visual system of managing work as it moves through a process. Kanban visualizes both the process and the actual work that you are doing in that progress. So it's basically making the inexplicit explicit. Again, I know, too long. Don't worry, I will break it up for you. So Kanban, first of all, is a pull system. And actually, no, I'm sorry. First of all, it is a visual system. Typically, when your team is following Kanban, you will actually have a big board somewhere where the team is sitting, a whiteboard or anything, and you have sticky notes as post-its to say, okay, these are the tickets that you are working on, these are the tasks that you are doing. And you will have columns that says to do, in progress, blocked, review, etc. And you actually, as a team, you keep moving those stickers from to do to done every day, and just to keep that process very visual right in front of you. So that is first. Now, if a pull system is, you notice here there is no concept of a sprint. There is no sprint backlog. There is no sprint planning or any of those things. You have a product backlog, and every time you finish a task, you pull another one. You finish a task, you pull another one. And the way to work, the best way to work in Kanban is by working in WIP limits, work in progress limits. Typically, as an engineer, you wouldn't work on more than 2 tasks because your mind is not capable. I mean, it is said, right? You can only focus on one thing at a time. And if you're really experienced, you can juggle 2, but not more than that. So typically here within the team, you would set your limits on how much work you can do at one point of time. And this method follows continuous planning and integration. So you're always, as a team, you will constantly find yourselves planning your tasks and refining it and making sure that the priorities are always, always, always up to date. And there's also continuous integration with the end product. You do not have sprint increments here. Once you're done with it, you deploy it, you put it into production, and it's out there, live. Quicker turnaround time. So excuse the P, that was a typo. Quick, and that's what I said, right? With continuous planning and integration, your turnaround time for a task is much, much quicker. Typically, if I'm working in Scrum, I would say, okay, I'm going to ship only once I reach 50 pamphlets. But in Kanban, every time you finish one pamphlet, it's out. You have the next one. It's out. You have the next one. It's out. And lastly, there are very defining guidelines to Kanban. And typically, I know a lot of teams say, okay, yeah, let's just work in Kanban, but there are Canva is actually much more stricter than Scrum. You need to follow certain rules if you want to do it to the T. I would say it's a little more complicated. And personally, I think really experienced teams, once you have a strong grasp on Scrum and an understanding of your team and how it works, I would then just recommend Kanban to come as your step two. It's like your master's degree. You can't do it without bachelor's. Now, Kanban, as you see, because of it's because it is there's no fixed time box, etc. It has a lot more values that we need to look into. Again, in no particular order. You have respect, focus, agreement. Some of these you can see is already similar to our Scrum values. You need to respect every single member of your team. Because without that, Kanban is just going to fail. It relies highly on collaboration because there's no time box, right? So the minute you do something, if you need to collaborate with somebody else, you possibly can't finish your task without the other person finishing his, if there's a dependency. So you typically plan more, you need to coordinate more with each other. There is a much higher level of understanding within the team, which is why I said this is like your master's degree. You need to get a very high understanding of your team and how they work so that you can plan accordingly. You can have those faster deliverable times. And it relies very heavily on balance as a value because, as I said, with no time box, it is very easy for a team to go out of hand. You start taking too much work. You try to start pushing things out under a lot of pressure, which is very unhealthy for the team because you then put yourself under a lot of stress, under a lot of pressure, and your quality of work also declines. So you need to find that right balance in how you work within Kanban. There is also transparency. The whole fact that it's visual, it's out there. Tomorrow, anybody from another team, if they come and just see your board, they should know exactly what is happening. And for those of you who work with different tools like Jira, etc., I'm sure you will always look at, hey, keep your tickets up to date with comments. Make sure that people know what is happening in your ticket. Because, yeah, I don't know how to finish that sentence. There's continuous flow. That's it's as it is. You start something, you finish it. You typically you don't wait. You just take another one and another, and it's an unsaid agreement within the team that you will, because there's no time box. There's a lot of this goes hand in hand with respect, collaboration, all of that, right? I trust you as a team so you're not whiling away time. It's an agreement that you will work to your maximum capacity and you will do as much as you can, because in Kanban, each person has a different pace of working. A team lead will of course work much faster than a new member in their team, right? But that should not influence each other because everybody knows a newcomer is doing the best he or she can. And typically your Kanban teams are very, very customer focused, which is why your priorities are up to date. It could always be changing based on what is needed. If you deploy something in production that might cause a new problem, priorities changed because the customer is here. Kind of like, I don't want to say boss, but it's like the customer is at the top right there. You always need to make sure your customer is happy. And it also emphasizes a lot on leadership. And I don't mean here leadership by one person. Each and every member within your team plays a leader's role because you are your own leader. You need to make sure that the stuff you are doing to contribute to the team is done at the best of its capacity. You are also not only working on your stuff, but you will also find yourself collaborating with other people. You will find yourself sometimes talking with your customers. Hey, okay, something went wrong. Well, how can we fix it, etc. So each one in your Kanban team plays a leadership role. So these are the Kanban values, and this is the Kanban workflow. It looks very simple, and that is where people go wrong. They say, oh, this is very simple, okay, let's just do Kanban. Well, it's not. It just looks simple, but when you work within it, you will realize it's actually a lot more complex. you need to have very clear definitions of what happens in each of these columns. And if you put something in testing, you need to, your teammates need to always be proactively aware that, hey, something's come to test. We need to manage the testing along with our in progress task. Or if you have a blocker, how do you do that? You need to manage that within the time frame. So honestly, there's a lot I would like to address maybe in another video. If you guys want, I would dive into Kanban. Um, but for now, this is just the basic introduction to this framework. Next one, we've been talking too long, is Scrumban. Now, this, as the name suggests, is a hybrid of Scrum and Kanban. This combines the structure of Scrum and the open flow of Kanban. Now, what elements of Scrum are incorporated in Scrumban? We have the integration of planning at regular intervals with synchronized retrospectives. In Scrumban, yes, you do have retrospectives, which if you noticed, I did not say in Kanban, because typically you don't have it, but different teams, different working methods. Within Scrumban, we decide how much work you can do based on sprints. You do work on sprints over here. And you also decide based on the complexity of the work, you fix durations of your sprints. Typically, you do not want to change it. If you say 2 weeks, then yes, okay, 2 weeks, but that's it. And you prioritize on demand. So tomorrow, if something changes, typically in Scrum, you would wait for those teams who follow Scrum, very rigid Scrum methods. You will know what I'm talking when you say, okay, no matter what happens, you cannot take on new stuff within a sprint. In Scrumban, that's not there. It's very flexible that way. If priorities changes, your tickets do change within Scrum. You do have a change in focus for that sprint, and we assure necessary levels of analysis before starting development. So here in Scrumban, you kind of refine your tickets a lot more. You give a lot of emphasis on refinements and plannings, because if I know what I need to do, even if my priorities change, it's fine. I will make sure I do it. What elements of Kanban are there? Well, it is a pull system here. As you finish something within 2 weeks, if, hey, okay, everything went well and I finished all my work, great. You pull a new ticket into it. You don't just say, okay, no, I have to wait. Also, we look at within Scrum, Scrumban, you also look at, I did not, work in progress limits. That's what I was looking for. You do decide here how much work, and this, I think, I do not know why we don't specify it in Scrum, but I think this is something that, irrespective of what methodology you're using, you should follow, is work in progress limits. Then the advantage of Scrum, I think, is it's very easy for us to identify bottlenecks because it's all visual, right? And that is something you see in Scrumban as well. Because it is so visual, you automatically know, okay, testing is a blocker because my teammates are not testing on time. You then look at how you can fix that problem. There are always opportunities to improve, and it's much more easier to identify that within Scrumban. And you define and use policies that help, make this transition. So within Kanban, as I had mentioned, you need to really define what each step is and what each method is. Same way in Scrumban, also you need to decide those methods earlier. And the values, I will not dive into it again, but since it's a hybrid Scrumban, the values are a lot more. You need to, I would say, if you are a team that is looking into Scrumban, you really need to pay attention to both the values of Scrum and Kanban. And although I know, at least with personal experience, people are like, yeah, values, I mean, we know all of this, why are you talking? But if you do not get these are like your foundations of the system. If you do not get this right, if you do not understand each of these values, it is going to be very difficult for you to then work in any of these methods. So what is the Scrumban framework? It's a habit. So you do have a product backlog, you do have sprint planning, but you have a Kanban board. So a sprint planning is going to be over here basically an approximation of how much work you can do, but there is always room to add or remove. And that is what I want to emphasize. In Scrum, you typically do not remove, but in Kanban, we do remove based on changing priorities. So Scrumban adopts that part as well. Bugs and tickets. You have a Kanban board, which is again visual. So you do have those tickets, you do see continuous progress. And once you're done, once there's a blocker, you will happily take on a new task, or you will remove something from the board. With Scrumban, you do have a daily stand-up meeting. In Kanban, you typically don't have that because it is expected of you as a team to make sure all your updates are always available. As I said, right, if somebody comes and looks at your board, they should automatically know what is happening. So in Scrumban, we do encourage those daily stand-ups that you do in Scrum. You do meet once a day, you do answer certain questions, you do give updates, but this update is not to one person, it is to your entire team. And you do have retrospectives here. That is one of the reasons I really like this method, because in Kanban, typically it's an option, but in Scrumban, I would say again, no choice. You do it. You do talk about problems, because if your priorities are changing too often, that is something then you need to talk about, right? You need to say, hey, why are our priorities changing? What is happening? You identify those bottlenecks. You talk about those bottlenecks within these retrospectives. And then as a team, you need to also figure out action items to then fix it. And that is Scrumban for you. At this point, I also want to say, if you guys have any questions, or if you agree or disagree with anything that I say, please do share your comments with me. And if you feel that, hey, you want me to just talk about any one of these topics a little more, explain a little more, I'd be happy to do so. Just drop me a line. As I'd mentioned, Scrum is typically your entry into the world of Agile. So I would like to talk about the different Scrum ceremonies and what they actually mean, who are the drivers of those meetings, who are the participants, etc. So there are a few different Scrum ceremonies. You have refinements, then you have the planning, you have followed by the daily stand-up, you have the sprint retrospective, you have the sprint review. Yeah, sorry, that's it. Well, refinement process. Typically over here, you have the PO, the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the dev team as the participants in these refinement meetings. The goal of this meeting is to consistently maintain a minimum of 2 sprint worth of stories that are ready to work. This allows the team to have a ready supply of work and pull in at any given point of time due to priority shift, which we all know they often do happen. Duration. Typically, your refinement happens for 2 hours as a maximum for a 2-week sprint. But sometimes if you have a lot more tickets, or if you have lesser tickets, your time can vary. Best not to go more than 2 hours. Who are the participants of this meeting? As I mentioned, it's the product owner, the Scrum Master, the entire dev team, and who are the animators of this meeting. So you have the PO who typically drives this meeting, because he's the one who has spoken to your stakeholders, gotten all the information, and he has most of the information in terms of Q&A. But it is the developers here, and now I'm focusing more on software teams here. It is the developers who are actively participating and driving all technical discussions. Personally, refinement meetings are the one place where you can have as many technical discussions as needed to understand what is the scope of a particular ticket. So you have the tech, which is why I say the dev team is driving all of that part of the conversation. And the Scrum Master here typically assists both the PO and the dev team, and also will intervene when, for example, the discussion is going too long, or if we are going off track, or if we've crossed time, if you spend too much time on a particular topic. That's where a Scrum Master would intervene. Then you have the planning process. The goal of the planning process is to define the objective of your next sprint. How much work can you as a Scrum team do in the next 2 weeks? The duration again is how long is needed for you to discuss your capacity for that particular sprint. And I know a lot of different teams have a lot of different ways of doing it, but personally, I think the estimation of tickets typically happens. I would do it in this planning meeting, because in the refinement you have technical discussions and there's a lot of information that has been exchanged, and you just need time to process that. You need time to just, based on all this discussion, read the ticket again, understand exactly what is needed. So that, personally, I feel is not the best time to estimate a ticket. I would do that during planning, so that you estimate, and then you already, if you have been working in Scrum for a long time, you already have your team capacity. You then just say, okay, if our capacity is 60, 1, 2, 3, 4, these 4 tickets are already 60 story points, we are not taking any more. If not, you take more. And ideally, because you have already refined your ticket, you shouldn't spend more than 30 minutes for a 2-week sprint in planning. Typically here, if there are any unanswered questions, if there's any change in priority, it's the PO who informs the team. Participants, same people as in this image, PO, Scrum Master, and the dev team. And the animators is, this meeting is driven solely by the product owner. And the dev team are active participants here because they are the ones who decide on what they can work on. And they estimate the ticket based on the complexity. Scrum Master, same as refinement, will help and assist and make sure that the meeting remains on track. Our daily stand-ups. Same, again, the group of participants don't really change much here, but the objective is for the Scrum team here to give a clear and precise update on what is happening. I say Scrum team here because I noticed a lot of places, it is only the developers who tend to talk about what they have been doing. If you follow the 3 questions method, it's usually just the developers who are answering them. But I think it is important that every member of the team, the PO and Scrum Master included, participate in this meeting. You just give an update. Hey, since yesterday, these are the things that I have done. If there have been any important meetings a PO has attended, you share those updates. As a Scrum Master, if there's anything interesting you have done or any places you have helped unblock, share it with your team. And of course, you flag any blockers. That goes without saying. If anyone is blocking, you discuss about that blocker. You just get your basic information out in this meeting and not spend too much time discussing the blocker. That can happen after the daily stand-up. And a maximum duration is 15 minutes. It should not go more than that. If your team is smaller, please do not mistake and say, hey, for a 3-member team, we can take 15 minutes. No, this is 15 minutes for a team size of not more than 8 people. So you can accordingly calculate for your team. Participants, you have the dev team, the Scrum Master, and the PO, who is a silent participant. I will come back to this point in a bit because there are exceptions. Animators is the Scrum Master and the dev team and the PO as well, but typically it's these two who are driving the meeting. Now, there is always room for exceptions, as I mentioned, for a PO, because sometimes you do need him to ask some questions. What I say silent participant here because as a PO, I've noticed sometimes you tend to ask questions. You do want updates. So you tell, hey, what is happening on this ticket? Or what did this person say? Those are not the conversations we encourage in the daily stand-up. So, which is why I say a PO is a silent participant in terms of asking questions. But if there is an urgent situation, if you have a stakeholder meeting right after the daily and you need some kind of information, as an exception, you can ask it that one particular time, but do not make it a habit because that's typically where these meetings go out of hand. And same goes for Scrum Masters. Even with dev teams, they tend to ask questions about each other's updates. Please avoid all of that as much as possible. Now, my favorite one, the retrospective process. This works mainly on continuous improvement and health of the team. It is very common that we forget about team health. We forget that at the end of the day, each and everyone individually, you guys are the most important. You guys need to be happy mentally to work. And that is something that the retrospective looks into talking about. You can not only talk about work-related problems, but sometimes it's good to share a personal achievement, or if you have a personal, hey guys, Monday blues, it's fine. These are the meetings you share all of that in, because this is, sorry, at the end of the day, you're working family, right? You need to have that open line of communication with your working family. You talk. This is a retrospective is typically a very safe space for people to talk. You should be able to, for an example, I can say, if you feel that one of your engineers is not performing very well, this meeting should be a safe space for you to constructively criticize. I emphasize on constructive criticism here by saying, hey, you could improve on your code quality. I think you have the potential. Maybe you can coach them as to how you could offer help. And typically here we do not tend to take things personally. And this is what the Scrum Master at the end of the day needs to ensure, that you do not cross that line of professional and unprofessional. The duration, this varies based on your team size, but I would say at least a minimum of 90 minutes, because just for the team to get started, your conversations. I wouldn't say 60, I would say 90, although most people just do it for 60 minutes. The whole team participates in this meeting, and it is the Scrum Master who prepares for it and animates it 100%. I would really encourage everybody who's watching it, if you are taking part in retrospectives, just open up and talk it out, because that is what makes your team stronger. When you have that line of open communication. Even self-criticism is something that you can look into in these meetings. You can also look at, hey, I have noticed that I am not performing really well. Could you guys help me? You can talk about, okay, as an action item, maybe a workshop is something that's intended, but this is the space to do it. And your sprint review process, as you know, this is the one meeting, as you see, which we need stakeholders. A lot of times stakeholders tend to not make time for this meeting, but I think that is very important. You need to make sure that your team has sprint review meetings based on if you have stuff to show or not, and make sure your stakeholders attend that meeting, because it's just a very direct, open line of communication between everybody working on that particular product. So yeah, the objective is to inspect the product that was delivered at the end of the sprint this could be done via demos, via presentations, via walkthroughs. You can give a live demo. You can just record a presentation and show it, or you can just, sometimes you can even, if it's already in production, you can actually just walk through the actual thing that you have done, the actual changes you have made. Based on your agenda, it varies, but ideally 60 minutes should do. Leave at least 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So please plan accordingly. Everybody here is a participant, the stakeholders, the product owner, the dev team, and the Scrum Master. And the animators it's a shared role. You have the product owner who facilitates the meeting in terms of driving the agenda, but it is the dev team who is presenting the stuff that they did, because they did it. The Scrum Master here assists in terms of moderating the Q&A sessions, or if one of the presentations are going a little over time, you need to do a time check, etc. And also intervene if maybe the Q&A is going a little too long, then you just need to intervene and say, hey guys, okay, we need to take this offline, etc. The stakeholders here are usually the audience of this meeting, and typically we would like them to engage in Q&A if they have certain questions. And the one thing that a lot of you will notice is the sprint review sometimes has a direct impact on the backlog. Based on what you show them, they might say either, hey, we don't need XYZ feature, or, oh, now that you've done this, I think we have lost this, we need XYZ feature. So typically out of this meeting, you will see a change in your backlog, which is why we do this meeting before your next sprint planning. Now, what are the roles in Agile? You can't do Scrum, you can't do Kanban, Scrumban, no problem. At least if you can have team roles and if you can define what each member in your team will do, that already is half the battle won. You can improve on your current workflow as well. So as a product owner, what will I do? A product owner is someone who owns the product backlog. Your product owner writes user stories and the acceptance criteria. This is all, of course, based on discussions with stakeholders, discussions with the team, and after understanding what the requirements are, it is product owner says, okay, if we do this ticket is done when XYZ things are matched, which is your acceptance criteria. A product owner is also responsible for prioritizing the backlog and, is also responsible for prioritizing the backlog. And once it is prioritized, decides the release date. I do not know what is happening to me. Sorry for that. And the content after discussing with the team, of course. He is responsible for the product backlog. It is a product owner who decides if a stakeholder request should be taken into the sprint or not. The product owner can deny stakeholders' requests because he, at the end of the day, is responsible for his product. Thus, the name product owner. You are not at any given point obligated to do everything that the stakeholder asks for. No. At the same time, you cannot force your dev team to do something. It is always a collaborative discussion. People skills are very, very important here. I would really recommend that, again, as I already mentioned, a product owner accepts or rejects product backlog items. I think I've been recording for too long. That's why this is happening. Let me just drink a water. Much better. All right, next up. It is the product owner who has the power to cancel a sprint if he thinks the code is redundant. Now, a lot of times I know people say, and this is something people have said to me, hey, you're the Scrum Master, you're the driver of this. Agile is yours, Scrum is yours. No, just want to clarify, it is not the Scrum Master's. It does not fall on the Scrum Master to drive this. It is very much a team effort, but each person in the team takes responsibility of a certain aspect of it. And the PO here is responsible for the sprint because typically he is the one who is accountable. I will show you some, he's the one who's accountable for return on investment. So if he feels that, hey, we're not making any progress, that it does not make sense to do a sprint, we should instead take some time out and focus on our strategy, look at maybe another approach, etc. He can do that. He or she can do that. And the product owner also coordinates and works very closely with the Scrum Master in keeping up the Agile process, because it is not only the Scrum Master's responsibility here. And this is something I would like to emphasize, that without the product owner, there's not much a Scrum Master can do. Our hands are limited. I would say if Agile is this human body, the PO and the Scrum Master are the two hands, and your dev team is the brains of the project. So it is all you need to work together. Roles in, so what does the dev team do? There's a lot, so it's all on your screen to read. The dev team basically builds the product that the PO envisions. Your dev team, as a dev team, you need to ensure you have all the necessary skills in your team to achieve that vision that the PO sets. One of the nice way I like to put it is the PO looks at the what we need to do. He looks at the what aspect. And it is the dev team that looks into the how aspect of how we need to do it and what process we are going to follow. The dev team is typically a very self-organizing team with a high degree of autonomy and accountability. Typically, because of your various skill sets, you guys are very you automatically know based on the tickets who will do what part of the project, because that's something it's good to discuss right at the beginning of the sprint during your planning. And you are pretty much responsible and accountable for your ticket, for the code that you do, for the code that you push. And it is also the dev team that decides how much work you do in a sprint. As a PO, I might want to do 10 things in the next 2 weeks, but if the dev team says no, well, no. Because they know, they, as I said, right, they know the how, and they know how much time it takes, how much they need to invest, etc., to achieve that goal, and while ensuring the highest standards, of the highest quality standards. Apart from being cross-functional and small, we also are collectively responsible for developing it, for testing it, and for releasing it. So a dev team has a lot of aspects within themselves that they need to look into. And most of the decisions, actually, in a dev team, typically all decisions need to be done together. Although you have a team lead, yes, who at the end of the day has the final say. It is always nice to have a discussion with the team. Here are everybody's ideas. Have a constructive discussion, and then yes, you have the lead who then takes the final call after listening to everybody. Now, Scrum Master, what do we do? Well, a lot of small things, but I think very crucial things. Clearing obstacles. Now, here I do not mean blockers in terms of tasks. Different companies do it different ways, but if you're blocked because you are waiting on an update on somebody, that is where Scrum Master can help. But if you are blocked because, oh, my keyboard's not working, you raise a ticket to your IT team. As a Scrum Master, I could help you follow up there. I do go and follow up with my IT team and saying, hey, keyboard. So yeah, establishing an environment where the team can be effective. I think I have emphasized this a lot in my video, that a happy team is a productive team, and it is the Scrum Master who makes sure that everybody in your team is happy. You are very effective. If somebody's having a bad day, well, go home or at least talk to somebody. And this is where I would say a Scrum Master would play that role. A very non-judgmental and a very neutral person to talk to, because the Scrum Master does not come from a product or an engineering side. They are right in between. So if you have a problem with your PO, I would suggest go to your Scrum Master, and vice versa. Only because they can facilitate that discussion so that the two parties can come together, talk productively, constructively, and then leave that room happy. Addressing team dynamics, as I already mentioned, right? If there are some conflicts within the team, typically a Scrum Master would address that. If I notice something, I wouldn't wait sometimes for somebody to come and tell me. I would notice it, and I would go again then to those two individuals, talk to them. Hey, I noticed this. Is everything okay? Or hey, I noticed that you've made certain decisions without discussing it. Why did you do so? Maybe next time we could talk about discussions. Try to find solutions, and always look at, as a Scrum Master, I feel we are we take on a more passive role. If there is a fire, you do not throw oil. No, you look at, okay, if water doesn't work, sand. If sand doesn't work, you take a cloth and you hit it. But typically a Scrum Master should always look at bringing down conflicts unless it is absolutely necessary that it needs to be escalated. That would be the last resort. Ensuring that there is a good relationship between the team, the PO, and outsiders as well. Stakeholders tend to be a little pushy sometimes. Then as a Scrum Master, you would then go with your PO hand in hand to address that and to tell them, hey, you need to back off. but in a very, very nice way. You cannot tell people to back off. Protecting them from outside interruptions and distractions. You have a lot of meetings that you would attend, and especially now that all of us are in this remote working situation. I am sure one thing everybody notices is you guys are getting into way too many meetings. At least it is something that I face. And as a scrum master, I would then, if you feel it is really too much, I would sit with you, look at your calendar, and we would try to figure out a way that we can either have like a no meeting day, or how do we reduce the number of meetings that you have? What is the purpose? Make sure every meeting has an agenda, etc., etc. Coaching the team on the best practices of Agile. Um, Typically, it is said that when you have a Scrum Master, I think it goes with the name, right? Scrum Master. We are the go-to people for coaching. I'm not saying as a Scrum Master, I know everything. No. But at the same time, there are certain practices that the team needs to follow if you want to be agile, and that ownership falls then on the Scrum Master to make sure that every member of your team knows what is expected of them, what they need to do, and then they do it. We then have a support system for the team members, and this is often neglected because people are like, what support system? I mean, come on, it's just work. But when you start talking, sometimes if you're having a bad day or something happened at home and it is affecting the way you work, go reach out to your Scrum Master, just talk to them, just share it with them, because it is proven that when you talk about something, you do feel lighter. And I can tell you, at least from my side, a Scrum Master is a very, very neutral person. You just share it, they will listen, so you can unload yourself, and that's it. You do not have to worry about the Scrum Master going and telling 20 people, because that does not fall under what we do. You can say a Scrum Master is a personal counselor for the team. He or she is like your personal counselor. Um, Use that resource, I would say, as much as possible. And the Scrum Master also would help the team plan a major release or a deployment. If you have a major change coming up, which involves communicating with a lot of people, it might involve a lot of different things on your checklist that need to be done to ensure that you deploy this or you release it. Typically, your Scrum Master is somebody who can help there as well. Of course, they will need help, but if you're able to guide them properly, I think as a Scrum Master, they would be able to help you plan this end to end. Also, a lot of times workshops and seminars need to be organized, but as an engineer, as a product owner, your hands are full with your work, right? Engineers are busy with their sprint goals, product owners are busy planning the next sprint, your roadmap, etc. The Scrum Master can help organize this. You can just tell them, hey, we not only can you tell the Scrum Master if you need a workshop, but a Scrum Master can also help organizing workshops for you if she feels it is needed. Typically, if you're a new product owner within that team, then it will be up to your Scrum Master to then organize a product workshop for you within the company or somewhere else, or give you the product workshop, because typically we would expect the Scrum Master to understand the basic knowledge of it. And well, that was a very abrupt end, but thank you for listening to me talking for I don't know how long now. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them over the comments below. And I would also like to take this opportunity to ask you if there is any particular topic you'd want me to do a deep dive into. This was very, very high level. I covered a lot of topics, but if you feel that, hey, I would really like to know about a process or a team role or any particular methodology, I would be happy to research and present that to you as well. So feel free to request stuff, comments, criticism, everything is accepted. Thank you so much again for watching, and I hope you all have a great time. Yeah, actually, yeah, it's a YouTube video, so I have to say this. Like, share, and subscribe, please. Ta-da!